Now I'm going to ask the very first inaugural question of our new community, called the question. Why are we here tonight? I think that many of you are here, to be honest, because you already know one of the hosts, and because you want to be supportive and encouraging. So I really want to thank you for that, because we all know at the core of every special community is the gift of encouragement. And I really feel that, we all feel that, so thank you. Some of you are simply curious and perhaps open to being part of a new experiment. And on the surface, this may already feel like a pretty safe experiment that might just turn out to be worthwhile, even valuable to you. Because after all, our lives are too crowded and too complicated already. We are surrounded by the white noise of a soundbite-driven world, and our attention span is being relentlessly compressed by a culture that doesn't want us to take time to actually pay attention. It's always a bit of a dilemma, isn't it? It's a dilemma that isn't really anybody's fault, and there is no blame to be accepted for what is really just the ongoing struggle with our priorities, right? We wrestle daily with the reality of an intense, sometimes exhausting quest to manage our lives with good intentions, a positive direction, and hopefully, along the way, an occasional experience of real meaning. The important point in all this is that you are here. Your curiosity, your need to know something new, won out over the stress, distractions, procrastinations, and apathy that attack us and influence us every day, and that's me included. And not coincidentally, your curiosity winning out happens to be part one of the possible answer to the question, why are we here tonight? The reason I say that your curiosity is an important part of the possible answer is that I've learned through my own experiences of community, this mild, harmless, vaccine form of curiosity that we generally allow to share with each other is often just a very thin shell that covers a deep, intense desire to understand what might really be true about ourselves, about the world around us, about the universe beyond us, and even about what might be possible beyond that. The peeling back of our passive shell of curiosity can result in the exposure of a very active, very intense desire to understand things. And it can be personally very uncomfortable and even make us feel a little bit awkward with each other. Anyone who's had young children, some of us have, or can remember being a young children, must remember the importance of the word why in a child's not so passive search for truth. I sometimes wonder where that important, very frustrating word started to lose its luster compared to the other practical words like who, what, where, and how. But as adults, if we allow this unpeeling of the comfortable shell to happen, even encourage it to happen, it can be, even in itself, a revelation. One of the things that we hope will occur through this community is that our passive, comfortable curiosity will be gradually awakened to become that active, uncomfortable desire to understand and actually know. So that's part one of the possible answer to the question, why are we here tonight? It's your curiosity, whether it be passive right now or something else completely. Now, part two of the possible answer to the question, why are we here tonight, is almost a contradiction, if not just ironic, especially if you agree with part one of the possible answer. Because it's not just about your curiosity, it's about our cynicism. As I said earlier, many of the people that I've shared community with over the years expressed a quiet but wholly authentic desire to pursue the important questions in their lives. This desire expressed itself in many diverse ways, through creativity, through relationships, through introspection, through involvement, even through disconnection. At the same time, I realized that many of those with this desire also had a highly tuned sense of caution, a defensive perimeter, if you will, quite frankly, a serious bullshit meter that reacted swiftly and strongly to anyone or anything that claimed to be the authority on what was true about us, our world, or our universe. Now, it's kind of difficult to criticize our bullshit meter. It seems like every single day, something we were told, something that was allegedly proven, something or someone that was sworn to on a stack of Bibles or Qurans, or backed up by the latest peer-reviewed, double-blind scientific study, or reported to us by a trusted journalistic source, turned out not to be altogether true, and sometimes completely untrue. So we feel misled. We feel betrayed. We even doubt that much of what we're led to believe is really true after all, or even if there's such a thing as truth. And as a result, our cynicism starts to overshadow and even diminish our curiosity. So I'd like to offer up to you a complete possible answer to the question, why are we here tonight? And that possible answer, which is as individual as each one of us, exists in the tension between our curiosity and our cynicism. It's a kind of equilibrium between what potentially could be an active and intense desire to understand what is true, that at the same time is opposed by the equally intense resistance to being told what is true by someone else. We want to understand and know, but we want to be personally responsible for that understanding and knowledge. We don't want to be told what we know. We want to initiate our own search without pressure. We want to personally consider, discover, and finally understand what is true for ourselves. The question is our own expression of a classic tradition that flourished in ancient Greece, in the city of Athens, on top of Mars Hill, at a gathering that was called the Areopagus. Now, for over 500 years, the Areopagus flourished, first as a high-level political council, then as a kind of judicial Supreme Court, and finally, as a unique intellectual and spiritual forum, where an ongoing dialogue took place amongst philosophers, scientists, politicians, theologians, soldiers, citizens, and activists, all converging from everywhere in the known world. Now, even though the Athenians possessed a very established set of principles and laws, including their very own pantheon of gods, the Areopagus was by design a completely neutral institution. It was an agenda-free zone dedicated to investigating and understanding the multifaceted nature of truth in all its forms. The Areopagus community was so committed, in fact, to the free expression of ideas that they actually constructed a monument to remind them of this important principle. In the very center of the public square, where all people were welcome to present their ideas and theories, there stood a large statue with the inscription, "To an unknown God." Now, in this painting, you can kind of see that statue kind of on the right side of the painting in the background. And this statue had this inscription, "To an unknown God." This statue is actually an enduring symbol of humility for even such a proud and enlightened people as the ancient Greeks. The presence of the statue declared that even they did not, or perhaps would never know, everything. The statue was also a symbol of exploration and discovery, even destiny. Perhaps most importantly, the statue of the unknown God was a decidedly non-cynical declaration of belief that the truth of things was indeed out there somewhere. The very fact that this community existed acknowledged that any important truth was far from being easily discovered or understood, but nevertheless was theoretically attainable and worthy of reverence. So, the ancient Areopagus community of Athens has inspired the questioning community of Kensington. I present this ancient connection to you with the hope that we'll have the same humility about what we think we know, as well as the same hunger to search for what we don't know. My chosen method to explain what this community is can be connected to a very important 20th century artistic movement known as Cubism. Now, the Cubist movement in art began in the early 1900s, was primarily led by the painters Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. It's considered one of the seminal game-changing movements in the history of modern art, and even in all the history of art itself. In Cubist artwork, subjects are deconstructed and reassembled in an abstracted form, but remember, not all abstract artists are cubists. So instead of depicting subjects from a traditional single viewpoint, the cubist creates the image from a multitude of simultaneous viewpoints to represent the subject in a kind of amplified subjectivity. It's a very personal context of expression. Now, not to diminish the important contribution of Monsieur Georges Braque to the Cubist movement, our main companion on the journey tonight will be Pablo Picasso, who everybody knows. I'm going to briefly share with you now some comparative images to give you a sense of the alternative path that we're suggesting for the question. This first set of images are both titled Girl with a Mandolin. The painting on the left is by a 19th century Croatian artist named Vjeslav Karas. Now, it's clearly a beautiful and elegant image of a woman playing the instrument. And we can just enjoy the colors and the serenity that Karas produced in this painting. Now, on the right is one of Picasso's earliest Cubist studies of another girl with a mandolin. You can see that he has, in fact, disassembled and reassembled his subject to reveal something else that only he sees. Now we see it too, but it's left up to our imagination to speculate on what it actually means. The second set of images illustrates more dramatically the contrast between conventional and Cubist perspectives. The painting on the left is called The Weeping Madonna by a 15th century Dutch painter named Dirk Boots. Now, there's no doubt that this is also a very beautiful and deeply emotional image of a woman in sadness. On the right is Picasso's later Cubist work called Crying Woman. What's remarkable about this painting is the dramatic unpeeling of the very emotional outer layers of sadness to expose an even more powerful, completely unique inner layer of sorrow. It's almost as if the Cubist perspective has attempted to turn the subject's experience literally inside out. Some of you may be familiar with a lady named Gertrude Stein. Does anyone know Gertrude Stein? Gertrude Stein was an influential feminist author and renowned art collector of the early 20th century. She lived in Paris for much of her life and was a close friend, actually, of both Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. During her time in Paris, she wrote this important description of Cubism. The point of Cubism is that you paint what you know is there, not merely what you see, but it must be there because you have other evidences than reality. When I read this description of Cubism, it struck me immediately that it was also a pretty accurate description of the question. It covers all those key components that I spoke of earlier as reasons why we're here tonight. Remember, it's about our inherent curiosity about what is true. It's also about our reflexive caution and cynicism over being told what is true by someone else. And finally, it's about an unpressured motivation to consider, to search for, and perhaps discover what is true for ourselves. Our very own form of amplified subjectivity. Now, those of us who are hosting this community have made a commitment to avoid ever trying to tell you what represents the absolute truth of anything. Okay? Each of you here are responsible for your own experience with the search for truth, and we're going to do our best to collectively honor and encourage that individual experience. It's completely intentional that this community was not named the answer. Now, the next set of images I'm going to show you should really help you understand how the question might inspire us to dig deeper or climb higher in our desire to understand what truth really looks like. These images are different perspectives on the subject of war. The first set of images I've entitled The Glory of War. On the left is a traditional painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware during the American Revolution. Pretty much everyone's seen this. The picture on the right is of Canadian soldiers in combat in Afghanistan. Now, even though the images are separated by over 200 years, it's fascinating how they both evoke a deep sense of courage, even nobility, to the pursuit of war. Now, we can say we oppose war on principle, But I have to confess to being a fan, actually, of these kinds of images, both in fictional and non-fictional settings. I'm an enthusiastic reader of military stories and a lifelong fan of war movies, particularly because of their portrayal of the glory of war. The second set of images I've entitled The Sorrow of War. Now, there are so many paintings and photographs of this very inevitable outcome of war, but I thought these two images captured the deep anguish and sadness of both civilians and soldiers alike. In both images, these are real people caught in the sad reality inside the glory of war. These images of sorrow represent as much of the truth about war as the first images of courage and nobility do. Now, we're somewhat conflicted by this, right? Even frustrated by the spin and the ambiguities of war and peace, and by the question of whether or not one condition is merely the absence of the other. We find it difficult to accept a simple answer to this question, and yet, how are we supposed to understand it? So now I'll share a third image with you, which I've entitled The Soul of War. And it's Picasso's 1937 Cubist masterpiece, Guernica. I don't know, has anyone seen Guernica before? Okay. This painting depicts a bombing attack by fascist aircraft on the small defenseless village of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. I'd like you all to just take a moment and allow your eyes to rest on the various parts of this painting and open yourself to the unpeeling of the soul of war. From the dying glory of a soldier with a broken sword, to the senseless murder of innocent children, to the anguished cries raised upward to the attackers, or perhaps to God, to the newsprint copy. Can you see the newsprint copy inside the horse? To the newsprint copy reporting and spinning the event for purposes of glory or sorrow, even to the confused agony of animals who have no control over man and no choice to be but victims of human beasts. It's perhaps not coincidental that it took a Cubist to most accurately answer this endless question of what war really is. Perhaps beyond. And as I said, we plan to disrupt by encouraging a culture of questions rather than conclusions, and by honoring the questioners among us. Now, because we're a community with no programmed answers or conclusions, but with a belief that a path marked by questions is the most important prerequisite for knowledge, I want to quickly share a quote with you that expresses this belief far better than I can. Recently, I was listening to a radio interview with a renowned medical researcher who had devoted his entire career to finding a cure for a very serious and complex disease. Whenever he got discouraged by the slow progress towards solving this gigantic scientific puzzle, he recalled a quote that his wise mentor, another famous researcher, had borrowed from the American author E.L. Doctorow, who originally said it about the challenge of writing. His mentor personalized the quote to describe the researcher's journey, and I'll show it as the researcher first heard it. Medical research is like driving at night. You never see further down the road than your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. Now, I've taken the liberty of personalizing this quote as well to help you understand what we're attempting to do tonight. And here's how it could read for this gathering. The question is like driving at night. You can never see further down the road than your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. So essentially, the question community is hoping to encourage a decision to jump in the vehicle, turn the headlights on, and begin a long, interesting drive to an as yet unknown personal destination. And yes, we think you can do the whole trip that way. The sole mission of the question community is to invite you, provoke you, even inspire you to consider a path. It's quite possible that this path will initially take you from being just a bystander to being an observer. If you can take that first step, it's wholly possible that you can be further transformed from being an observer to being a thinker. And if you get that far down the path, what's to stop a thinker from becoming an explorer or even a Cubist? Only you know where you are right now on this path. And only you can ask yourself what you wish to become or where you wish to go. So, at this very first embryonic gathering of the question community, I'll leave you with these questions to ponder and hopefully dialogue about over the next few days or weeks. What do you think our world would be like if the explorers outnumbered the bystanders? Where are you on this path right now? And where would you like to go?